Hi, Mark.
Hi, Amy. How you doing?
I am well. Welcome to your Blogging Heads debut. This is exciting.
It is exciting. I'm looking forward to it.
Sure. For our viewers, we should introduce ourselves. I'm Amy Sullivan with Time Magazine.
And I'm Mark Stricherz, author of Why the Democrats Are Blue, and a blog at whydemocratsblue.com and In Front of Your Nose. And I have both of our books, recent books, here available.
Excellent.
This is my book, Why the Democrats Are Blue, Secular Liberalism and the Decline of the People's Party. And this is Amy's book, Party Faithful, How and Why Democrats Are Closing the God Gap. How's that?
Well, I'm grateful that you brought the visual aids today.
Well, it's a good book.
You got to sell the books.
That's right.
Well, since both of our books talk to varying degrees about Democrats and religion, and because that's a big topic in the news these days, that is going to be the subject of our discussion today. And I think we could just start right off by talking about the meetings that both Obama and McCain have been holding separately with different religious leaders. And I'm curious to know what you think about them.
I think that both candidates are going for no more than a couple of percentage of the voters. I'm afraid that I don't see Barack Obama going for more than 1 or 4% of the religious vote, evangelicals and Catholics specifically. And McCain, I just to see him going for no more, it's about the same percentage. I think both candidates are going for other types of groups. I mean, they're certainly going for more moderate, more secular, mainline, and other types of voters just as much. I think this is not so much of what George Bush was trying to do in 2004. What do you think?
Well, I guess I'd have to push you a little bit on the idea that they'd be doing things with a certain percentage in mind of who they're trying to go after. I mean, to take Obama for one example, I think what he's done is so different than what Democrats in the past have in terms of reaching out to religious groups. I mean, he's obviously not bringing in Franklin Graham because he thinks he's going to get Franklin Graham's vote. He's doing that so that he can have a conversation with religious leaders who aren't like he is necessarily politically and may not even theologically be where he is. But he's doing it to show a general openness and to kind of communicate his own faith story, which, as we've seen in the past, and you've written about this too, is kind of a key characteristic for winning presidential candidates. I mean, one of the things Bush did brilliantly, I mean, he had a very, very aggressive religious outreach program, and I think we can agree that paid dividends for him, particularly in 2004. But what it mostly did was give kind of swing voters who may not even be terribly religious a sense of who he was as a moral individual. It gave them a sense of what he really believed, that he had a firm foundation. And doing that could give Obama really a way to kind of, I think, put at ease some concerns of a lot of moderate or independent voters who aren't necessarily in, a target religious group, but who are nonetheless voters who he would like to appeal to.
I just see Obama, and we'll stick Obama here on this point, just all he's doing is conceding the rhetoric that religion is important and that he ought to meet with religious leaders and therefore that he should not exclude them. What I think Bill Clinton was successful in doing in 1992 and 1996 and what Jimmy Carter did in 1976 was marry that rhetoric with some policies. Jimmy Carter came out against federal funding of abortion. Bill Clinton in 1996 went on Christian radio stations saying that he supported, in fact signed into law, the Domestic Marriage Amendment, which was the anti-gay marriage amendment of that year. I just don't see Barack Obama having any specific policies that's going to meet that religious voters are going to like, unless you can tell me some. I don't. He had this big
I mean, I guess my problem with that is your metric is whether he has any policies on abortion or gay marriage. I think he can point to a lot of policies that are connected to the economy, that are connected to reducing our dependence on oil, that are connected to healthcare reform, and those actually took up a large amount of the conversation a couple of weeks ago when he met with some, I think it's fair to characterize them as center-right religious leaders. I mean, abortion did come up, but that was, very much not what the discussion was limited to.
Right, but how different is that really from what John Kerry and Al Gore were doing in 2000 and 2004? John Kerry, as you point out in your book, said faith without works is nothing. We need to help the poor. We need health care, and that didn't get him really anywhere. As you point out, John Kerry should have spoken at these religious colleges, and maybe Barack Obama will do that. But I really just don't see that the strategy of his getting more than a couple percentage point of voters. And hey, maybe that'll be enough to tip him over the scale. Look, George Bush won Ohio by 60,000 voters in Ohio had switched their votes. We've been talking about the Kerry presidency right now, so that's all Obama needs. But I think the media are just overstating this idea that Obama's going to have some great wave of religious voters. I just don't see it. Only a couple percentage points. I've said that many
times.
I
think maybe they're missing the point of it, that he certainly wants to get elected, and it may be that outreach to certain religious constituencies will get him there.
Yeah.
But, the people I've been talking to who were in these meetings say the tone of it was almost, when I'm elected, even if you don't vote for me, we're going to need to have areas where we can work together, because we are political allies on a number of issues. And this is part of having an ongoing relationship. That was the difference, is Gore didn't sit down with these folks. Kerry didn't sit down with them. He might have talked about issues. Both of them had policies that should have appealed to religious constituencies. But sometimes it's just as simple and obvious as actually having that conversation and saying, hey, I want you on my side when we're working on these issues. And in the absence of that, I don't think it's surprising that both Gore and Kerry failed to get the same level of support from religious groups and from religious voters that Clinton did.
You make a good point. John Kerry and Al Gore did not meet with those religious voters, but still, meeting with the religious bigwigs is more of, I think, a governing strategy once you're elected president. But you need to get elected to become president, needless to say. So, meeting with Franklin Graham and these other evangelical leaders, I just don't see how that really helps him get out hundreds of thousands of religious voters.
Sure. Well, and if that's what it was limited to, I think you're absolutely right.
Right.
Maybe we may have erred here by focusing our conversation on the meetings that they're having. That's certainly what's gotten the most attention in the media over the last few weeks. And I have to admit, I'm curious to know if you know exactly what the McCain religious outreach effort looks like. I've been trying to get information about it and having a hard time pulling it together. I do have a sense, because I've talked to the folks on the Obama campaign, of what they're doing in terms of kind of broad-based voter registration in religious communities, really using a lot of surrogates who can go out and kind of, it's almost testifying on Obama's behalf, saying, for instance, he's had a number of moderate and conservative Catholics sign on to support him, and so they'll go out to their friends and say, I know abortion is an issue for you. It was a problem for me too, and here's how I've thought through it. So it's almost duplicating the Bush strategy in 2004 of outsourcing persuasion to average Americans who then go talk to their neighbors or their friends or their fellow parishioners.
Well, here's what I know about the McCain's campaign outreach to voters, is that he has, say, a couple of staff devoted to evangelicals and a couple of folks devoted to Catholics. What exactly he's doing with evangelicals, I don't know. He doesn't have much going on, or it's a subterranean effort behind the back channel maneuvers that no one will know, or he's not doing a whole lot. With Catholics, he had a meeting with, I think, Catholic leaders in Philadelphia. I'm not sure if the Cardinal was there, but he had a group of 20 meetings, 20 Catholics, I understand, and the meeting went well. He was asked about his position on the various issues, and he gave the usual boilerplate about saying he was pro-life and against gay marriage and that, and then he moved on to other issues. foreign policy, war on terrorism specifically, and the economy. So that's what all the outreach I know about. What I don't know if it, and I know there is a Catholic outreach group at the RNC, and for the evangelicals, I'm sure there is one too. I don't think anyone thinks, and I'm sure it's not going to be the case, that McCain's effort will rival George W. Bush's in 2004, right?
Right. Yeah. It's it's been interesting. Already in the spring, obviously, Obama has had to deal with the issue of his former pastor, Jeremiah Wright, and then McCain also, I think because of that, was kind of questioned about accepting the endorsement from John Hagee, which, isn't a name that most average Catholics know, but, well, okay.
Or how about any?
I
never heard of the guy. Had you heard of the guy? You've read a lot about religion. So you know about John Hagee.
But I have to say that I also think there are some kind of key conservative Catholic leaders who either knew about him or once they heard that he had given the endorsement, knew what he had said about Catholicism. And I don't think that's actually losing McCain any votes, but what it does do is affect the enthusiasm of Catholics to get out there and really beat the Bushes the way they did in 2004 for him. And that's what I've been able to pick up on is, some of the outside groups who really poured millions of dollars into the campaign, or at least, into their own literature and ads and things in 2004. They're just not doing that this time around, and maybe that'll pick up in the fall, but so far I'm not picking up on signs of that. So also in the last few weeks, Dr. Dobson has come into the news again. We actually hadn't heard from him in a while, certainly not since the Republican primaries in the news. But he took issue with the speech that Barack Obama gave 2 years ago to Jim Wallace's Culture Renewal group about the role of religion in public life. And it's interesting. I guess I wasn't surprised, particularly since Dobson was a little upset about the fact that Obama mentioned him in the same breath as Al Sharpton. I don't think he takes that very well. But I hear a lot of conservatives mention that speech to me really in a praising way, particularly since they hadn't ever heard anything like that from a Democratic politician. So it may be that he's misjudged, that he may not have heard of that speech before a couple of weeks ago, but other religious conservatives had, and they actually didn't hold that against Barack Obama.
They did not.
Not that I'm sure there are people who did not like the speech. Certainly there was criticism when he gave it 2 years ago. But I've heard from a lot of people who say, look, I don't agree with the guy politically, but that was really a remarkable speech. He was carving out a space for religious people and religious ideas in public life, and that's what we've been arguing for decades. It needs to be there. Right.
Well, it's interesting that activists had to say that they didn't find that surprising. I think they would have been offended or taken issue or disagreed with Obama's speech, because Obama's speech was basically, I can't govern the country according to the Bible because of what the Old Testament has to say about dietary restrictions and all that. And while Obama's totally forgetting the New Testament, and I think these Christians would be upset with Obama's interpretation. I mean, the New Testament is supposed to be this foundation for traditional values related to sex, marriage, and the family, and treating others with respect, and the golden rule and all that, as you point out in your book. So I guess the fact that these Christian activists didn't find exceptional, I think maybe they're becoming more liberal, or I don't know, what do you think?
I don't know. I mean, the guy who had a op-ed in the Washington Post about this over the weekend was Pete Wehner from the Ethics and Public Policy Center, formerly from the White House.
Right.
And he's not exactly a liberal guy.
No.
And he had pretty glowing things to say about it. Again, saying, look, we disagree theologically, but this was a really important speech, and it was a good speech from his opinion. And odd that that was what Dobson chose to take issue with.
Yeah. Just Jim Toohey you're talking about?
Pete Wehner from the
Pete Wehner,
Ethics and Public Policy Center.
Right. Yeah, I did not read that story, so I guess I can't comment knowledgeably on it. Surprise, surprise.
Well, I'd recommend it. We'll put up the link for viewers to see.
There you go. Right.
Kind of interesting to see one Christian conservative taking on another.
Right.
But
I guess this general point, I just don't. This idea that Obama doesn't have to concede on any of the hot button cultural issues and just be seen as this normal, God-fearing, religious Christian, I just find that impossible, really hard to believe that this is really going to help him substantially. I think he has to make some move towards the center. I don't understand why Obama cannot even. Well, I understand the politics behind it, but I think if Obama was really smart, he would, say, endorse Senator Casey's abortion act with helping pregnant women in need, and he has not even made any feints in that direction.
Well, he was actually a co-sponsor of a similar bill in the last Congress. I'm not sure why he hasn't talked about it, and honestly, I'm not sure because he does talk a lot about abortion reduction in private. I've actually pushed his staff a little bit on this and why he doesn't talk about it more in public, because I think that is something that a lot of Catholic and evangelical voters are waiting to hear from him.
Now, in your book, you talk a lot about abortion reduction as being a big term. He's actually Barack Obama's actually used that term recently.
Well, he has in private. I mean, this is what he talks about in the meeting that he had with Franklin Graham and Rich Cizik and a few others in early June.
Right.
But, it is interesting. We did a time poll recently of Catholic voters, and one of the things I wanted to find out was kind of what issues Catholics were prioritizing this year. I don't think it's true at all that Catholics have become less pro-life, and I don't know anyone that's arguing that. But it is the case that when you ask them what issues are going to drive their votes, it's all things like the economy, high gas prices, healthcare reform, the war in Iraq, and only about 30% say that abortion and gay marriage are very important issues that will drive their vote. And that's down around the same area as people who say that global warming is driving their vote. I think for evangelicals that may be a little more resonant issue than for Catholics right now. But the really interesting point, and I wonder what you would think of this, because maybe this isn't an accurate reflection of where people are, but we asked them, could you vote for someone who didn't hold your position on abortion if you agreed with them on other issues that were important to you? And 80% of the Catholics said yes, they could. Only 16% said no, I absolutely could not vote for a candidate who held an opposite position on abortion. So at least what Catholics are telling pollsters is that they don't need to have a candidate be exactly where they are, at least in an election cycle like this, when they're concerned about other issues.
Right. I'd say three things to that. First thing is gas prices are absurdly high now. I wonder if that's how much that is function that it's summer and that consumers are really driving demand, and that's why the prices are going up. So, and that by the fall, gas prices will lower, and therefore you have more Catholics and other types of voters saying they're going to vote on more cultural issues. I remember in the summer of 2004, a lot of people were complaining about high gas prices, and then by October, November, few people were talking about high gas prices. Secondly, not that many people vote on abortion, but I would say Catholics too. But one thing is those Catholics who are voting on those issues are in the big key Rust Belt states, Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia to some extent, and Michigan, and in those states those elections are so close that the candidate needs to be seen as a moderate on that issue in both directions. And well, I guess that was my two issues I'd make about that. So it's for Catholics, it's an important issue. It's not the issue certainly. The vast majority of Catholics are not single issue voters. It's just it's an important issue for many of them, especially in these Rust Belt states. And for the life of me, I just don't understand. The Democratic Party has lost 7 of the last 10 presidential elections, and a lot of these elections on social issues, and they're just still not moving towards the center. They still don't want to alienate the cultural liberals in the party and the feminists. And now maybe the Democrats can get away with it this year, but long-term strategy, I think that's a political loser.
Well, I guess
It has been.
what I'm saying
Yeah.
is I don't think that's what they're doing this year. In fact, you've seen much more discussion about the abortion rate and trying to do something about that
Right.
than you have in the past.
Right.
And, as I wrote in the book,
Right.
in the 2006 midterm elections, there were some states, in those Rust Belt states you mentioned, my home state of Michigan and Ohio, you had two pro-choice Democrats running for the gubernatorial seats there, who talked about abortion reduction. They didn't necessarily move to the right in terms of supporting more abortion restrictions than they had in the past. But they talked about ways where people who are pro-life and pro-choice can come together to actually do something about the abortion rate. And they ended up getting a high percentage, improving vastly on John Kerry's standing in 2004 in those states, a high percentage of Catholics and white evangelicals in their states. So it doesn't seem to always be a barrier. I guess, what you're saying is Democrats need to make an effort to reach out and to really have more open minds about abortion.
Right. I mean, you make some good points. I guess the situation between 2006 and 2008 is not analogous in just two ways. The first way is that the congressional wing of the party can be more moderate on cultural issues and more populist on economic issues because the party can run candidates that fit the district better, and you can't really do that in a presidential election. You just got one horse to run with, so to speak. And second thing is that in these congressional midterm elections, fewer folks just seem to vote on the cultural issues. They see the presidential election almost as a referendum on cultural issues. Certainly more voters do. And also, I say third thing is that in Ohio and Virginia, I think those are the states you mentioned, you had really unlikely Democratic nominees. Ted Strickland, governor of Ohio, had been a Methodist minister, I believe. There hasn't been any ministers running for the Democratic nomination quite some time, I'm sure. And in Virginia, with Tim Kaine, he was a missionary in South America or Central America, and that's unlike any other Democratic or Republican nominee, except maybe Mike Huckabee. So I just see those just as different. But so I just in your book, you're quite honest about how, I don't know, maybe jumping ahead here, but just feminists and the secularists really have almost a chokehold on the party's control on social issues in these presidential elections. We're getting too far afield here?
No, we can definitely move to that because that's the subject of women and women voters is key this year. I guess I wouldn't call it a chokehold. I mean, I certainly don't mince words in the book when I talk about the influence of not even a secular mindset, just kind of the idea that religion isn't relevant to politics. How that really shaped the Democratic Party in a way that I think was politically short-sighted. But I think it was more an assumption that religious voters weren't Democratic voters. And, it wasn't so much pushing those voters out of the party as assuming that they were out of the party, and therefore you didn't need to worry about it when you figured out your approach to controversial issues or looked at the rhetoric that you were using. Right. And in fact, during the years when I think Catholics and evangelicals were actually feeling like the party was leaving them, when it was in the mid-1970s, early 1980s, I couldn't find any evidence that the party was actually consciously thinking about this. There was just, after Roe, a real embrace of libertarian language about abortion, the embrace of privacy and choice, and not a lot of discussion about whether abortion was something that needs to be limited at all. The court had made very clear that there was room for restrictions in the third trimester, but the party didn't really talk about that at all. And as a result, as you know, a lot of pro-life Catholics within the party really felt somewhat muzzled. In many cases, I think they muzzled themselves. But eventually, most of them ended up flipping and becoming pro-choice.
Right. Well, just on a historical point, I differ with you. In my book, Why Democrats Are Blue, for those that have heard of it, I note how Fred Dutton, Bobby Kennedy's campaign manager in 1968, wrote a memo in April of 1969 saying that we, the Democratic Party, need to ally with the activist groups in society, the affluent suburbanites, college-educated young people, blacks, and women, and we need to kind of loosen our ties with the blue-collar whites, which in back then at the time meant really Northern Catholics and Southern white Protestants. And Dutton put through with the other members of this McGovern Commission that ran from 1969 to 1972, commission was designed to reform the party's presidential nominating system. He pushed through informal quotas for young people and women as delegates. Now, this may not sound like a big deal, but the delegates are the one who write the party rules, and I'm probably not telling you, Amy, nothing you don't know. But with these, with the fact that by 1980, half the delegates must be women, those female delegates are not just ordinary housewives or people working at the local five and dime. They're activist types and very liberal on cultural issues specifically, and probably a little more rightward leaning on economic issues. And they're putting through planks that are just way out of the mainstream of American life. Federal funding of abortion and wholehearted endorsement of Roe. And the Republicans have their positions that are out of the mainstream, but the Republican nominees can run against the party platform on those issues, and the Democrats can't. And I mean, it's not just. I don't know why. Well, I know why a strong Democratic nominee can't really distance himself from the feminists and the seculars in the party, but I really think it behooves the Democratic nominee to pull Sister Souljah on these groups. And in fact, Bill Clinton, I mentioned in my book, he wanted to do, from what I can tell, he wanted to do to Sister Souljah and the blacks is what he did to do with Robert Casey, and that's to say, let Casey speak at the 1992 Democratic Convention, and the feminists wouldn't allow him. So, anyways, that's my one credit course on the McGovern Commission and its legacy here. Sorry for going on so long. But,
I had heard actually the opposite about Casey in 92, that it was Gore who went to Casey and really apologized and was pushing for him to speak. But at any event, let's stick with the question of women and whether a Democratic nominee could stand up to activists within the party, because I think some of them have in the past. And I'm not sure that those groups really hold the sway that perhaps you think they do anymore. Certainly when I look at the women's groups right now, they seem pretty weakened to me. I mean, Emily's List put everything behind Hillary Clinton's candidacy. And it was a gamble, and it didn't pay off. So they're kind of slowly and begrudgingly in some cases trying to make common cause with Obama. But Ellen Malcolm of Emily's List has said, look, he's not a woman. He's not going to be one of the races that we're really putting all our resources into in the fall. They're going to focus on congressional races that they've kind of been ignoring up till now.
Right. Janet Malcolm said that recently.
Ellen Malcolm of Emily's List.
Ellen Malcolm, I'm sorry. Yeah, well, what's your take on that? I mean, isn't that a huge mistake? I mean, I think the election is going to be close. Don't you think that's a big mistake on Ellen Malcolm's part?
Well, I mean, it's the mission of her organization is to get women elected. You can argue about whether that's always the best idea. I mean, they've run some kind of controversial races running women against incumbent Democratic pro-choice candidates, incumbent males, which I think is probably not the best political decision. But in any event, we've talked about whether women supporters of Hillary Clinton will get behind Barack Obama, and the polls already show that they are. I think this was one of many issues where my colleagues in the media like to gin it up as, is the Democratic Party going to break apart forever? and a few weeks later, it's, oh my gosh, there's this amazing and totally unpredictable unity in the party. We never saw this coming. Well, this is what happens every cycle with the supporters of the losing candidate. They're not happy about it. Obviously, this primary went on so long that there was a lot of time to get invested in her candidacy.
Right.
And there are some women who talk about backing McCain as a protest vote, who have said, don't you dare blackmail us with abortion. We're tired of being taken for granted that we'll stay in the party because of abortion. But, from what we've seen, they're coming back to the party. And yes, Obama needs their votes, but it is hard to think, particularly after another 4 months of the choice groups out there reminding women what McCain's position is on abortion, because a lot of women mistakenly think he's pro-choice. I think that will eventually get through and really take care of the stragglers who still want to cast a protest vote.
Right, so this is probably just media hullabaloo. The Washington Post had a story on this over the weekend about these feminists who were upset with Obama, or really upset specifically that Hillary Clinton didn't get the nomination. So I guess we're in agreement this is probably more media sound and fury. Is that right?
Yeah, I think you can always find somebody to fit your theory.
Right.
Doesn't necessarily mean they're representative. And again, the polls seem to show pretty clearly that they're not representative. But that just...
Then again, can we not say that maybe there are, say, 6,000 or 10,000 women in Iowa City who may decide to swing the election, decide to stay home and maybe swing that state, or a couple thousand, say, in New Mexico, who may not sit on their hands? I mean, it's that's the thing about this election, I think, is that it will be so close that a couple thousand voters in each state will decide the difference. So maybe, obviously, in the aggregate, these feminists who are upset with the party over Hillary Clinton, maybe they... I mean, I would be interested to see any poll data saying, a couple thousand women are going to sit on their hands in individual states.
Yeah, I don't think anybody knows that.
Is there any idea to that, or is that just a pro-McCain fantasy?
It's hard to imagine that all of the women who fit in this very tiny category are somehow going to be clustered together in key states where it would make the difference.
Right.
We go through this every cycle with people thinking, well, maybe there will be soccer moms, and we cut things down. This is the Mark Penn problem of, sure, you may be able to find somebody in this small little niche, but they'd have to all be in the same state for it to actually make a difference.
Right, but I was interested to read that, say, Eugene McCarthy in 1976 probably swung the state of Oregon for Jimmy Carter in that election, and maybe one of the other Midwestern states. But yeah, I grant your general point. It's maybe at that level of detail, it's just impossible to say what the heck's going to happen.
Well, and that brings up...
But maybe at the because all these women that were quoted in this Washington Post story, they're all from the blue states that Obama, needless to say, is not going to be a problem at winning in November. But I guess I'm just leaving it out there.
Sure. Well, you do raise the question of vice presidential picks, which, as political commenters, we're not allowed to have a conversation without bringing that up right now. And I'm curious to know, if we just leave out there, again, the challenge of appealing, say, to religious voters who haven't been in the Democratic Party the last few cycles, whether there is somebody who Obama could pick, or on the flip side, if there's somebody McCain needs to pick to keep those voters in the Republican Party.
Right. I think for Obama, not just religious voters in general, he should get Chuck Hagel or Colin Powell. I think that would bring in a lot of middle-of-the-road, working-class types who are concerned about Obama's credentials on foreign policy and experience, and gives them a Republican as well. So that would be a coup if he could get those candidates. Now, just for religious voters, I think that Obama would do best to get Tim Romer, the former congressman from Indiana, respected member of the 9/11 Commission. Now, I have a couple of months of reading stories about Obama's Veep picks. I have not seen Tim Romer's name floated, and I'd be interested to hear what you say about that. But I think he'd be an idealist. He's a pro-lifer from the middle part of the country, Catholic. He's not going to get any flack from other Catholics for his position on abortion or cultural issues. I think he was probably, maybe a little too right for the parties based on economics, and he's definitely too far right on the parties based on cultural issues. But I think he has all the advantages of Bob Casey with none of the negatives. That Casey's doesn't really have any foreign policy credentials. As far as John McCain, yeah, that's a question. It's really hard to say. I don't know if there's any really good choice. Maybe Mitt Romney, because he gets some Mormon voters in some of these swing states, Colorado, a couple other states as well. I can't think off the top of my head. But what do you think?
Well,
what do you think of my cogent analysis?
Well, Romer actually has been playing a big role as an Obama surrogate. He's been spending a lot of time in Pennsylvania, I know. Just did a service project in Philadelphia at a men's shelter. So he's definitely involved in the campaign. It's interesting, it is the question after John Kerry in 2004 that if you pick a Catholic, are you just causing more problems for yourself if you pick somebody who's not pro-life?
Yes, the answer is yes.
I think there are other pro-life Democrats who maybe would be better choices in that they are to the center or the left of the party on things like social justice and economics and healthcare and all of that. But you're right that this may indeed be a foreign policy election in which you need to be able to reassure voters. I mean, my gut sense has been that Obama really has two kind of diametrically opposed options. One is to pick somebody who's very heavily experienced in foreign policy and national security, and to just kind of be a Dick Cheney figure.
I'm sorry.
To do what Cheney did for Bush in 2000, or he can do what Clinton did in '92 and just kind of double down on change and pick another kind of new politician of his mold who can say, we're going to change politics as usual. I think it would also help him to have a couple more moderate Republican options that he could pull alongside him. And as for McCain, I don't know. I've always thought Huckabee would be a good choice for him, just because he's so darn good on the stump, he would be, an instant appeal to evangelicals. But I think there's actually a pretty small chance that he would be the nominee or the running mate.
Right. Well, Huckabee is funny, but he also has a big mouth, and his comment that about Obama and guns is not going to go very well. And I think maybe for that reason alone, McCain would not pick Huckabee. Yeah. But I'm sorry, I missed that. You think that Obama may pick an anti-politician, General Zinni, or some businesswoman, maybe for his vice presidential pick? No,
I guess I was actually thinking of another politician in his generation. One of the new Catholics like Tim Kaine or Bob Casey, for instance. Just somebody who can say, we haven't been in Washington for very long, but we're going to change the way things work. That was the appeal of Clinton and Gore, was that they were young and they had this momentum behind them.
Right. But, I mean, doesn't that run into the Jimmy Carter problem in 1976? We got all these new politicians and we're going to change things, but what we're going to change is, say, the president designing the tennis courts or the bowling alleys for the White House, and we're not getting a whole lot done in the rest of the country. We don't have much experience in dealing with foreign leaders. I mean, just to be facetious.
Right. Well, that's one of the challenges, is he needs to articulate between now and November what exactly his vision is. I've always thought it would be a good idea for a nominee of either party to kind of give a sense of who the stars in their cabinet might be. You don't need to announce everybody who would serve in your cabinet. But it's not a bad idea to give people a sense of what you're talking about. When you say you mean change, give us some names. Who are you thinking about? Prove to us that it's not going to be the same old people.
But who do you hear would Obama is most likely to pick?
I don't hear anything. I'm certainly not plugged in.
You're in Washington, you got to know.
And I feel like anybody I predict is automatically off the list. So I'm
Right,
keeping
yeah,
my mouth
exactly.
shut.
That's what I think, too. I thought Joe Lieberman, there's no way he was going to be picked in 2000 because he couldn't campaign on Saturdays, and you saw how that turned out. So
Turned out to not be that big a deal.
It's
John McCain doesn't campaign on Saturdays or Sundays, so it's not hurting him
right,
that much.
right.
Well, I think we may need to
So,
sign off,
I
Mark.
guess-
I got a deadline coming up, actually.
Okay.
But congratulations on making it through your first Blogging Heads. This has been a pleasure.
Yes, thank you. Should I show our books here one more
Oh,
time,
yes,
just so
please.
readers didn't get the
Free
point?
commercial.
You'll definitely want to read this book by Amy Sullivan, Party Faithful, How and Why Democrats Are Closing the God Gap, and definitely want to read this one, Why Democrats Are Blue, Secular Liberalism and the Decline of the People's Party by myself, Mark Stricherz, and do it over the summer, read it at the beach, and enjoy some good books about Democrats and the religious voters.
Perfect timing for it.
There you go.
All right. Well, it's been a pleasure.
Okay, Amy, good talking with you.
Take care.
Take care, bro.